All right, so I'm going to talk about how we control our blood pressure in our body. Make sure you understand why you would want to control blood pressure. Your environment constantly changes, your stress levels change, your diet changes, your body position changes. All of those things can impact blood pressure, yet you need to make sure you maintain a relatively stable internal blood pressure. So you need to have mechanisms by which you can increase or decrease blood pressure to maintain homeostasis. So there's 3 points or levels of control. Local, meaning just in that general area of the body rather than involving other parts of the body. Neural control, which of course means the brain is doing the controlling. And then hormonal control, which you learned a bit about in the last unit when you were learning about the endocrine system. All right, so local control, there's several types. There's something called metabolic autoregulation, auto meaning self, and that's whenever a tissue is not adequately perfused. In other words, it doesn't have enough blood flow, maybe due to loss of pressure. Wastes like CO2 will build up. The CO2 will cause a drop in pH. The tissue will then respond by vasodilating automatically, and that'll return blood flow to normal. And then once the waste products are removed, the vessels will constrict once again and go back to the way they were to begin with. You also have so-called vasoactive chemicals, and these are a variety of chemicals that can affect blood vessels. Serotonin, histamines, bradykinin, and prostaglandins are some of the biggies. You'll learn about each of those as appropriate for particular topics in 202. For example, bradykinin is an important vasodilator in your body. If you've ever heard of ACE inhibitors, those are a group of blood pressure meds. They are often used to increase the production of bradykinins in the body to help vasodilate or widen blood vessels to help regulate blood pressure and bring it down. All right, another form of local control is called reactive hyperemia. And this is when a tissue reacts by kind of overdoing it. So let's say blood supply is cut off to a particular area temporarily. Immediately after, the response will be an over increase of blood supply. So you'll kind of overdo it, hyperemia, too much. Angiogenesis literally means the growing of blood vessels, and this could be due to a variety of factors. For example, angiogenesis happens in the endometrium of the uterus each month in a woman's monthly cycle. Well-exercised muscles will grow new blood vessels to provide those larger muscles with a better blood supply. Also, vessels will grow around obstructions, and they'll grow towards tumors. And the control of angiogenesis is locally by a variety of chemicals, growth factors, and inhibitors. All right, and the next level of control is neural control. The medulla oblongata in your brainstem is a very important point of neural control for blood pressure. You've got a so-called vasomotor center in your medulla, and it will cause most of the vessels in your body to constrict, and it will cause the dilation of your skeletal muscle vessels and your cardiac muscle vessels. And if you think about it, that makes sense. This is an autonomic device. Autonomic, remember, is your fight or flight system. And if you need to fight or flight, you need to increase the amount of blood going to your skeletal muscles and your cardiac muscle so that you can deal with whatever stressful situation is taking place. Neural control involves either baroreflexes or chemoreflexes, which I'll talk about in a slide or two. All right, so proprioceptors are a type of neuron receptor that detects changes in body position and body activity levels, and you can then respond by changing blood pressure appropriately. Baroreceptors are pressure sensors, and these are important for you to know. Many of them are in your carotid arteries, internal carotids, but there's a couple of other locations for them as well near the aortic arch. And they detect pressure, and then your brain will respond by telling your heart to adjust adjust its rate, and you will also adjust the size of your blood vessels in order to adjust blood pressure. And then you also adjust blood pressure in response to chemicals in the blood. So for example, if blood pH is decreasing due to an increase in CO2 levels, you need to respond by increasing blood pressure so that you can increase blood flow to the lungs so that you can get rid of that harmful CO2. So chemoreceptors are mostly about control of respiration rate, but if your respiration rate goes up, you also need your blood pressure and blood flow to increase as well. Okay, so a little bit more specifics about baroreflexes involving baroreceptors. If you get mechanical pressure in your baroreceptors, which remember are found in places like your internal carotids and your aortic arch, you will have an automatic reflex. So for example, if blood pressure is too high, your reflex response will be to vasodilate. And if blood vessels are larger, blood pressure will go down because there's more room in your pipes. And you will also respond by decreasing your heart rate. Ultimately, all of that will reduce your blood pressure. And then you'll do all of the opposite things if blood pressure is too low. Sorry, my kids are really noisy in the background. They're having a lot of fun. All right, so you've got a similar diagram in whatever book you chose to purchase or download. So take a look at that. Okay, a chemoreflex. This, as the name implies, is when you have a reflex response to adjust blood pressure due to levels of chemicals in the blood. Primarily, we're talking about CO2 and therefore pH. The more CO2 built up in the blood, the more your pH decreases or becomes acidic. And the role of a chemoreflex primarily is to adjust your respiration rate. But another thing is it'll cause changes in your blood vessels. And what you want to have happen is you want to vasoconstrict. You want to tighten your blood vessels so that blood pressure increases, which will ultimately get more blood to your lungs, which will allow you to facilitate exchange of gases, get rid of that excess CO2, and take in much needed oxygen. All right, now let's get into hormonal control. And the first set of chemicals or hormones I want to talk about are your so-called angiotensin system. And it sounds like a complicated set of steps, but just give into it because you will learn about it again in other parts of 202. It's a very primary and very important mechanism for adjusting blood pressure. So what you have to start with is an inactive chemical called angiotensinogen. Angio means blood vessel, specifically artery, but blood vessel, and tense means to tighten. So ultimately, we're going to tighten up or vasoconstrict our vessels. Angiotensinogen is made by your liver, and it's released by your liver. You've got it present out in your blood at all times. It's inactive. It's just there ready for you whenever you need it. If you need to adjust your blood pressure, then your kidneys will make an enzyme called renin. And the job of renin is to convert inactive angiotensinogen into a chemical called angiotensin 1. And your kidneys will only make renin if blood pressure is low. So ultimately, our job here is to try to increase blood pressure. That's the ultimate result of this whole angiotensin system. Angiotensin 1 is still an inactive chemical. So it in and of itself is not going to change your blood pressure. So then you need yet another enzyme. This one is produced by your lungs. It's called ACE. The whole name is angiotensin converting enzyme, a very literal enzyme because it converts angiotensin into something. And that something it converts angiotensin into is angiotensin 2. Here we've got finally our chemically active molecule, and it is a very potent, very strong vasoconstrictor. So what I mean by that is that it will cause our blood vessels to get small. And another very important job of angiotensin 2 is to stimulate the production of a hormone called aldosterone. All right, so you've got a similar diagram in your book. I don't care what book you picked, there's something similar in it. So it's amazing when you think about it, all these different organs are involved. Remember, the liver is where we started. It produced angiotensinogen, which just floats around in your blood, doing nothing, just ready and waiting to become acted upon. If blood pressure is low, then your kidneys will release an enzyme called renin, which will convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 still is an inactive chemical. It's not going to do what you need. So you've got ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme, which is made by your lungs. It will convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 does two very important things. It vasoconstricts your blood pressure, which will immediately increase your blood pressure to help correct the problem of blood pressure having gone too low. The other function of angiotensin 2 is it tells the adrenal glands, specifically the surface of the glands called the cortex, to release aldosterone. And aldosterone helps to further facilitate the maintenance of that higher blood pressure by causing you to absorb more water, reabsorb more water, and therefore produce less urine in your kidneys. Ultimately, that'll help maintain that increased blood pressure because it'll maintain your blood volume. All right, so make sure you know all the various hormones that control blood pressure. Aldosterone, I was just mentioning, it helps you retain water by retaining sodium. Wherever sodium goes, water will follow. ANP is one of the few hormones that actually decreases blood pressure. It promotes the release of sodium, and of course you will then urinate more. It also promotes vasodilation. Both of those things ultimately will help your blood pressure to decrease. ADH helps us maintain a high enough blood pressure by retaining water in our kidneys and also vasoconstricting our vessels. And finally, epinephrine and norepinephrine are only used to control, well, they're primarily used to control blood pressure when you're in a stress situation or you need to be ready for action. Man, the twins are having fun. Sorry about all the noise. All right, so those two chemicals are what you've called adrenaline, and what they do is help you deal with a stressful situation or you need to be ready for action. So it'll tell most blood vessels to vasoconstrict, meaning blood will stop flowing to many of your organs, or slow down, I should say. And then it'll increase blood flow to your skeletal muscles and your heart, your cardiac muscle, so that you can deal with whatever situation you need to deal with.